Commons Standing Committee on the Government Operations and Estimates. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, October 17, 2022, the committee is meeting to consider matters related to the ArriveCAN application. Reminder, please do not put earpieces next to the microphones as it causes feedback and potential injury to our very valued translators. Welcome back to OGGO, Ms. Maynard. I understand you have an opening statement, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Merci. Alors, je vous remercie de m'avoir invité.
Thank you very much for having invited me today. It's been 3 years since my last appearance before the committee, but I think that the majority of what I'm going to be saying today really will be a repetition of what was said before during my previous appearances.
Start of the pandemic, my message has been the same. In April of 2020, as government institutions came to grips with the impacts of remote work, I issued a very clear warning. The extraordinary circumstances we found ourselves in has not suspended the right of access to information, a quasi-constitutional right, nor did they absolve institutions of the duty to document, which is a principle that underpins this right and is at the heart of government transparency. After all, as I noted in my January 2021 submission to the government's review on access to information, the right of access is contingent on 2 factors. 1, institutions properly documenting their key actions and decisions, and 2, the retention of these records. Simply put, the right to access government records depends on those records actually existing. In those early days of the pandemic, I spelled out the requirements of this duty in practical terms. Heads of institutions needed to ensure that their officials generated, captured, and kept track of records documenting decisions and actions. These records are also needed to be properly managed at all times. I asked leaders to set the example by providing clear direction and updating guidance on how information was to be managed in their new operating environment. Comme j'anticipais des conséquences
Because I foresaw the grave consequences that could arise from a failure to do so, I also offered a prediction for the future. In a statement published April 2020, I said, when the time comes for a full accounting of the measures taken and the vast financial resources committed by the government during this emergency, Canadians will expect a comprehensive picture of the data, the deliberations, and the policy decisions that determined the government's overall response to COVID-19. In the months that followed, I continued to insist on the importance of carefully documenting decisions and actions and to efficiently manage information. In fact, I then explained how challenges faced by public servants in management information, capturing it, and storing it in government repositories were creating barriers to transparency and eroding government's accountability to all Canadians. You will find similar references in the speech that I gave before your committee when I appeared previous to this day.
You can understand that I was dismayed by the release of the Auditor General's report detailing that the Canada Border Services Agency's documentation, financial records, and controls were so poor that she was unable to determine the precise costs of the ArriveCAN application. I reject any suggestion that in retrospect, a failure of this nature was justifiable or even understandable, given the circumstances that arose from the pandemic. I also take issue with the notion that this type of outcome could not have been foreseen. Comme j'ai démontré, je savais pertinemment qu'une situation
As I have demonstrated, I was acutely aware of the possibility of this type of scenario, that it could happen, and that it has been consistently and repeatedly after issuing warnings to that effect. So, in conclusion, I would like to remind you that my mandate is very specific. I investigate complaints about the processing of access requests by the government institutions. I can confirm that the office of my office has received complaints about requests related to various contracts awarded by institutions during the pandemic. As my investigations must be carried out in a confidential manner, I will not be able to comment further on them. Nonetheless, I will be very pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Maynard. Appreciate again that you were able to join us today. We'll start with 6 minutes with Mrs. Block, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Menard, for joining us today. I appreciated your opening comments, and I think no truer words back in 2020 were spoken in regards to the collection of information, the duty to document, and the retention of information. And I think what we're seeing today, as you pointed out, in the report of the Procurement Ombudsman as well as the Auditor General, that there are gaps in either documentation being created or kept. We don't know whether documentation was never created or whether it was destroyed. And these are some questions that we need to get to the bottom of as a committee that is responsible to ensure that Canadians are getting good value for the money that is being spent on their behalf. I know that your office investigates complaints from individuals who believe they have been denied their rights under the Access to Information Act, and that you strive to ensure compliance with it. And one of my concerns would be the inability for members of Parliament, through the work that they're doing on committees, to be able to access information. We've had to abandon a study that we were doing on outsourcing with a specific focus on McKinsey, because we were not able to access documents, and not able to access meant that there were departments that simply refused to provide this committee with the information necessary to complete that study and come forward with any recommendations. I also note that that part of your role is to function in an advisory role to Parliament and parliamentary committees. And so what advice do you have for parliamentarians, or how can your office help parliamentarians in their ability to access information from departments in the trying to undertake our duties as parliamentarians?
It's difficult for me to provide advice to you as parliamentary in accessing information outside of the system of the access to information, because my role is really to implement the Act. And I know that some of you have used the Act, and you know how frustrating that could be as well, because of delays, because of exemptions being used. My office is not able to see cabinet confidence within our investigations as well. It's something that we are the only jurisdiction in Canada that a commissioner does not have access to cabinet confidence to confirm that the information is actually secret of cabinets. I think that if there's an advice is, I've been asking for a legislative review. The government had promised one within our legislation right now. There's a mandatory legislative review that was going to be happening in 2020. It led to recommendations, actually not recommendation, a list of issues with the system, but the review of the actual legislation will happen only in 2025, I'm told. So as parliamentary, I think members, you have the power to make recommendations with respect to what kind of statute you think that the Canadians are entitled to. The right of access is not just for you, but for journalists, for Canadians, for members, that there's a lot of information out there. And I always said the records of government, it's public records, they are not, it's not a privilege to access those, it's a right of access. And we should not have to struggle to get access to that information. It should be provided as voluntarily as possible. And maybe one of the things that, I advise is let's change the legislations to modernize it, to make it more accessible.
Thank you very much. I think you've touched on I think, source of frustration for not only parliamentarians, but others who do submit access to information requests and the length of time that it might take for a department or a minister's office to respond. And then oftentimes the answers that are given are not as in-depth as they should be. And I know we've talked at committee about I think putting forward access to information requests in order to get the information that we're not able to get through the request for documents. I also want to note that it does say that the commissioner can issue orders related to a record, including requiring institutions to disclose information. How does that fit within the access to information process? Is that something outside of a request for information, or how do you undertake to issue orders related to a record, including requiring institutions to provide information?
This is an authority that...
I apologize. That is our time. You might have to get back to it at another intervention. Ms. Atwin, you're up for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Ms. Maynard, for joining us today. It's good to see my committee members as well. Most of us are joining from across the country. I'm here from unceded Wolastoqiyik territory in New Brunswick. And I appreciate very much your opening comments as well. The idea that, of course, a pandemic is not an excuse to not do our due diligence, to not to cut corners. On the contrary, and I really appreciate again that you've reinforced time and time again the need to carefully document any decisions, particularly during a time of crisis. And so that's led us here. We've had a very in-depth discussion about what has transpired, certainly a lot since the last 3 years, so that you might have come before a parliamentary committee. And I was also disappointed with what the Auditor General found. And of course, she put forward 8 recommendations, and they've been accepted. I look forward to them being implemented, of course. And also the Office of Procurement Ombuds. They put forward a procurement practice review that also had 13 recommendations. So I'd just like to ask you, in a reflection of that review, the Office of the Procurement Ombuds Procurement Practice Review, it's a mouthful, they found that the proactive publication information was missing for 17 of 41 contracts, so that's 41%. In these 17 cases, the original contract or one or more contract amendments valued at more than $10,000 were not available on the Open Government website. So what are the consequences for Canadians when contract information is not proactively disclosed?
Currently, the proactive disclosure is part of Part 2 of the legislation under the Access to Information Act, and it's Part 2 is a section that is not under my authority. So we don't have, in simple terms, I don't have the authority to investigate. I don't have an authority to accept a complaint with respect to what is proactive disclosed or not disclosed on with respect to the list that we find in Part 2. So there are no consequences, and there's no also right to complaint with respect to that part.
So do federal organizations or public servants face any consequences for not fulfilling their proactive disclosure obligations?
Not that I'm aware, unless you complain to the minister himself and they have something internally with respect to performance. There is no way to determine somebody's missing their obligation. The commissioner's office does not have the authority. We ask for the authority in the legislative review. That's something that, again, parliamentary members can recommend for the next round of legislative amendments.
And has the Canada Border Services Agency contacted you about implementing the Procurement Ombuds recommendation concerning proactive disclosure?
Not again, because it's not something that falls within my authority. The only relationship that we have with CBSA is with respect to complaints with access to information requests, and those complaints are active. So we are investigating those as we speak.
Okay. And in your experience, how common are issues with this piece about proactive publication of federal contract information? Do you just have any, general experience with seeing that happen?
I can tell you that a lot of complainants are trying to complain about it because they are aware that this is something that needs to be done. But because it's not within my authority, we don't keep track of who's doing it, who's not doing it. I'm busy enough with the 4,000 complaints that I receive every year under the access to information. I don't have a team that could be doing that. But I know that people in the public are complaining about these lists not being updated.
Great. Okay, so sections 13 to 26 of the Access to Information Act set out the exemptions that prevent federal organizations from providing access to government records as part of access to information requests. Much of the federal documentation requested by the committee was provided with redactions on the same grounds as these exemptions. So in your view, do exemptions in the Access to Information Act extend to parliamentary committees' right to access all information contained in these documents? Why or why not?
I believe that the parliamentary privilege of access is a different system. It should be treated differently. I think the Access to Information Act can be a good tool in terms of some of the exemptions deals with security, national security, and what the test is in terms of releasing some of that information. Same thing for commercial information. It could be, again, a tool that could be used to determine whether information would be harmful. But at the end of the day, the Act does not apply to a request made under parliamentary privilege. So it's a complete different environment.
Okay. And just quickly, my time ticking down, you mentioned that you have received complaints about access to information requests related to ArriveCAN and what we've been discussing, and that you can't comment kind of further, but is there anything general you can say about the subject of these complaints that you might be able to share with us?
Well, generally, I can tell you again that if records don't exist, access does not exist. So there's within our authority to investigate, we will be looking at what people are asking for, whether it was created, but I'm limited to records. The Act applies to records that have been created and documented and managed properly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Julian from the land of the New West Bruins. Welcome to OGGO. The floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
It's the block first. I apologize. We will get to you in 6 minutes. Sorry about that, sir. Ms. Vignola, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. Madame Menel, thank you for being here today. I am going to take a more technical tack, something a bit more ground-based. The government says that there is procurement that can be followed up. Arrangements exist in terms of procurement. But that site does not give us any information. The government site does not give us any information about follow-up. We have the open government site, in addition, which does give information on contracts, but back to 2010. And, before 2010, good luck to find any information about any contract whatsoever. But we have the inverse with buy and sell. We have the contract, but we don't have the general details. We don't have the number of the contract. We don't have the multiplier. We don't have what's on Buy and Sell Canada procurement. and so on. We don't have the details. So the validation and the clear computation of what was received in terms of a contract, what were the specifics of the contract, all of that becomes very difficult to decipher because we don't know anything beyond the original contract that might have been $50,000 and the ultimate ceiling, which might have been $250 million in this instance. So is there an aspect that in which open government is only words, just an expression that isn't translated into reality? Are there any insights? Are there people who look for information, who want to find information, but they can't? Well, once again, everything that you see on the various pages of the information that is on the government website and what is not disclosed, that information is given voluntarily or proactively disclosed because of the legislation. But my office has no authority to verify the research or to look further into that. I can tell you that I certainly would like to see more information because the website it makes information accessible, but it is almost too much, and it has to be easily accessible. So if there's a great deal of information, it may not be easy to actually track what you are looking for, to find the information that is relevant for you. I promote information, but you want it to be accessible information. Canadians who see information like that is incomplete, for example, or is very difficult to track, to find, lose a bit of trust in the information that they receive, or have only that to hold on to. We want to see more done so that Canadians can access a transparency. You know that there's an expression, divide and conquer. And when you go out and look at what was done in terms of open government here, it was almost like divide and conquer, rather. So, and that is my personal opinion that I am saying, of course. Madame Mineur, at present, currently, and in the future, given the burden of your task, does the government give you the funds that you really need to ensure that there is transparency in information? Currently, my office is funded to deal with 4,400 files per year. And over the course of the past year, we have received almost 8,000 complaints on an annual basis. This year, we received fewer complaints, but we were able to work on more files. But I don't have the funding to deal with the complete inventory of files. Some years it can go higher, and other years the workload is lower. So the funding for my office should reflect the demand, but presently we have to deal with all of the requests that are made to us under the existing funding system. Are there sectors of government that have asked you to make an effort, to try harder, to reduce the budgets, I can't think of the right word, to make some cutbacks? No, thank goodness, no. We have been spared the cutbacks.
Mr. Julian, now we will go to you. My apologies, I had hockey on my mind, so please go ahead, sir, for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm here in the traditional unceded territory of the Kakite people. These are the people from the Salish West Coast. Thank you, Madame Ménard, for being with us today. We do know that this whole contracting out issue has been ongoing for years under the Harper administration and under various administrations. These issues of contracting out can lead to issues of transparency. Under Harper, we saw what happened. We saw Phoenix, and now we're seeing this with ArriveCAN.
This massive increase in contracting out, both under the Conservatives and now under the Liberals. I wanted to ask you to start. You did mention that there were a number of complaints that have come in regarding ArriveCAN. I'm wondering to what extent you're receiving complaints about government procurement in general, and particularly in relation to contracting out. And can you share with us the number of complaints that you have received on ArriveCAN?
Specifically about ArriveCAN, I cannot come up with an exact number. I think it's less than 20. But in general, with the government, contracting is a big issue, and it's definitely something that Canadians wants to know about. They are interested in finding out how much money is spent on what. Other companies are also interested in the information that, who got the submission, who won the bid. So we have a lot of requests from other public entities as well, or other private entities. Generally, contracts should be open. The clauses that are used for contracting is something that should be in the public domain. Very limited information on those contracts should be redacted. In our investigation, we are often finding that we have to recommend or order the disclosure of information that is not protected under the Act. I think that the exemptions under the Act are very specific, and you can find it under Section 20. The test is very limited, but unfortunately, third parties, contractors, subcontractors are often trying not to get that information out there in the public.
So thank you for this. Upwards of 20 complaints around ArriveCAN. Do you have an estimate of the number of complaints that you've received about government procurement in general, particularly contracting out, which is started massively under the Harper Conservatives and has increased even more under the current government?
I don't have those numbers with me, but I can definitely send you a report with the number of requests or complaints that we have with respect to Section 20, which is related to contracting.
Merci beaucoup. Maintenant,
Thank you very much. All these questions about independent funding mechanisms, we saw that once again under the Harper regime. They cut a lot in the Auditor General's office in her budget, and it became very difficult for the Auditor General of the day to carry out audits. Are you underfunded? And are you subject to cuts that will make your task difficult? Is there an independent means of funding that would be preferable, that would allow you to do your work better? Because this is such an important issue for Canadians, providing transparency around government spending. An officer of Parliament is supposed to be independent of the government. We don't report to a minister. I am an officer of Parliament. That's why I'm here today. I can say with respect to my office, my funding is not subject to a mechanism, a government funding mechanism. I fall under, if you like, the Minister of Finance. If I have to make a request, I would send that the Minister of Justice would send it to the Minister of Finance, but it is the department that would be the subject of complaints made about my office. And so in that way, they are responsible for approving or not my requests for funding. But that it can have an effect on the independence on the way of my office and the way I do my work. I'm not the only one to say this, but there are other officers of Parliament who are completely independent, like the Ethics Commissioner. So that model exists already, and they could be looked at more closely to have a more independent model.
So what you're saying is that you need that independent funding mechanism to avoid having to go through the government to get the funding to actually do your job effectively. And thank you for your comments on that.
Thanks. That is your time, Mr. Julian. We're now going to Mr. Genuis, please, for 5.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ms. Maynard, it seems that from your opening comments that you were a bit of a Cassandra here. You prophesied correctly that there would be significant problems around information, that the pandemic would not be an excuse. The government was warned, and they didn't listen. I think that's an important testimony, not only what happened with the ArriveScam scandal, but also that people were warned, flags were raised in advance, and there was no appropriate caution shown. What are the responsibilities of ministers and of PCO, the Prime Minister's Department, when it comes to information being maintained and information being available?
Under the Act of the Access to Information Act, it's the Secretariat, Treasury Board Secretariat who's responsible to administer the Act. They are the department that are responsible to send notification or policies or explanation of how to apply the Act and making sure the administration is done properly. But within each department, the minister is responsible for the administration of its own responses to the Access to Information Act and making sure that the operation is working, that they have the sufficient resources, they have sufficient people working at it, and they also responsible to send guidance and directions. If a leader believes in access and believes in transparency, the rest of the department will work towards that. So what we see is some departments, it's working really well. They have great leadership, great guidance. Others, I was worried, and it's what happened during the pandemic. People working from home, people working on their phone, on their cellular, on Teams, and not taking notes, not recording what was happening. So this is again, I think it is a leadership issue.
Okay, so you expect leadership from ministers on that, as well as leadership from the Treasury Board. And to be clear, that includes not only on responding to requests for information, but ensuring that the obligation to maintain records so that they can be requested, that those are part of the obligations as well.
Exactly. Right now, there is no legislative duty to document. There's a policy issued by Treasury Board with respect to documenting records, keeping records, and there's also information management policies. But this has to be coming down from the ministers and the different departments, and TBS is definitely responsible for administering the Act. With that
and clearly that's not happening. Thank you for that. It has been alleged, there have been articles about this, that Mindone deleted email records. Can you confirm, first of all, that deleting email records, as described in the story, would be a violation of the law? And secondly, do you have any response or reflections to these very serious allegations against one of the principal players in the ArriveCAN issue?
I cannot comment on that specific situation, but I can tell you the Act currently have under Section 67.1 the prohibition of destroying, altering, falsifying, and concealing records with the intent of denying a right of access. So during an investigation and we find that documents have been destroyed and I have sufficient evidence to believe that it was intentional in order to not have that information accessible, I can refer the file to the Attorney General for further investigation under the criminal code. But it's not something that I can pursue when we pass the administrative investigation into a criminal investigation. I'm limited.
So just to understand that process that you just described, that might, you can't comment on the specifics around the allegations against Min Doan, but if you had these concerns, you would refer them to the Attorney General, who sits in the Liberal cabinet, Mr. Varani. Could you refer them directly to the RCMP? And if you were making such a referral, would the public know that you had made that referral, or would it be a private referral?
So currently, you're right. The only available, I can only refer to the Attorney General. Unfortunately, I cannot refer directly to the RCMP. It is something that I submitted to the Parliament or to TBS for an amendment, for possible amendments of the Act, that I should be able to refer to the appropriate authorities. But right now it's the Attorney General, and it is not something that it's private. This is something that we know we have done 6 times in the last 40 years of our existence. So it's not something that happens very often, because you have to believe that it was an intention in order to remove access to the information.
Thank you.
Okay,
very much.
I would just comment parenthetically
That is our time, please.
Oh,
Mr. Baines.
never mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our commissioner for joining us today. I know you said that some departments are following the guidelines. They're documenting and they're following the act as it's supposed to. Some are good, some are bad. Can your office make that determination whether documents are missing or never existed when it comes to CBSA in this case?
During an investigation, we are definitely looking at whether documents that were supposed to exist have been destroyed or are missing, in terms of if something is not there because it was not created in the first place, it's a little bit more difficult. But sometimes we find email exchange, or there's like somebody will make an allegation that a really big decision was made, but for some reason there is no records of it. And that's something that we can definitely comment on. But the Act currently applies to record that already exist. So if we find, again, that there is evidence that something has been destroyed or altered or, changed, or somebody telling somebody else to do that during an investigation, we can definitely look at Section 67.1 in terms of whether it was intentional or criminal.
And are things leading that way, that there was something there and it's not there now, without telling me?
We are, during our investigation, we will ask people, we will look at emails, we will look at attachments that are not there. We will, and we also welcome submissions by the complainant. Sometimes they know things that we need to know as well, so that we can pursue our investigation appropriately.
So, has anyone from CBSA reached out to your office for guidance in making sure they comply with the Access to Information Act?
It's very difficult to provide advice specifically to department on cases, because we may be called to investigate those cases. So we usually try not to intervene with the way management. But what we do is provide guidance in advance, like I did in 2020, about making sure things are recorded, making sure that people are managing.
I know I'm asking specifically about CBSA here. So has anybody from there reached out?
I'm not aware of.
Okay, and then can you maybe walk us through what the current state of CBSA, specifically ATIP process is? Are they one of the, well, it appears they're maybe one of the bad departments here. What challenges are they having, if any?
Well, currently CBSA is the institution that has the most complaints with my office, has received the most complaints with my office. Also is the institution that has the most active investigation going on. And they are having issues responding on time to requests, and they also have a lot of files with respect to refusal and the application of exemptions to files.
So, and you're not aware if they're doing anything to address these challenges at all? They're just, right now, there's an investigation going on, and ultimately, at some point, maybe recommendations will come down and they'll have to
Yes.
do something. But are you aware that they're doing anything to address the challenges that with being a leader in having the most complaints, et cetera?
I can just tell you that they are working with us on the investigations that we have open with them.
Okay, and ultimately, like this is a parliamentary committee and not a court of law. Eventually, we'll get around to the business of making recommendations. Do you have any for the committee at this time to consider? I know you've walked us through a few things, but I know you mentioned that there need to be legislative changes maybe introduced. Like, what can we do to improve every department and make sure that these departments are good at are good actors rather than failing on some of their duties?
Well, the duty to document should be legislative, so something that we can have an actual authority to look at whether things should have been documented or not. But right now, it's not legislated, and I would recommend as well that you look at the submissions made to the by the Ethics Committee on recommendations for the Act. Cabinet confidence, I should have the authority to review those so that we know that they are actual cabinet confidence and not something that's been used for documents that are not meeting the test. I should have an independent funding mechanism so I can actually increase the number of investigation and be more timely on those investigations. There's lots that can be done.
That is our time, Mr. Baines, but Ms. Maynard, if you have a full list, I welcome you to send them to the clerk and we'll distribute to committee. Mrs. Vignola for 2.5, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. In the case, I was listening closely to you, and I understood that if you thought that things had been removed, had been erased in the course of the study that we are doing now, this situation would have to be reported to the Minister of Justice. Have I understood you correctly? It would have to have been proven that it was intentional, because people do a bit of house cleaning in their documents, and so if somebody house cleans their documents but they did so unwittingly and take away information, it wouldn't be a criminal act, or would it? You say you would have to have proof. Yes. And do you have any proof in this current situation? But in view of the fact that we are undertaking this investigation right now, I really can't make any specific comment. And you're saying also that the CBSA is the sector where you have received the most complaints. Is that normal, given the public safety aspect that is attached to the CBSA, or does that go beyond it, beyond what is normal? Well, we are looking, but we have undertaken a systemic examination of what is going on in the CBSA, and we do so because there's been a 100% increase in the number of complaints. They have access to information like the Immigration Department does, but it is not related to what we are talking about today. It's due to the fact that they have access to information that is shared with Immigration Canada. How can I ask you this question? How can I formulate it? Has the CBSA enough staff to do what is necessary? Is that something that causes the complaints, or is it something elsewhere? Well, they have to have a team and that can meet the need. They have a good team, but there's increased requests. There are increased requests every year. So it's moved up to 10,000 additional applications and requests that are being made to an entity that is not equipped. And you have, even though you have good people working with you, at that rhythm, it's very difficult to keep up.
Mr. Julian, please, for 2.5.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I mean, I lived through the Harper regime, which was absolutely terrible for transparency. We saw the attacks on independent officers of Parliament by slashing budgets. The current Prime Minister came to power saying that he would be moving to be open by default. The government would be open by default. And Ms. Menard, you mentioned in your annual report last year, and I quote you, "Over the course of my time as commissioner, I've observed the steady decline of the access to information system to the point where it no longer serves its intended purpose." And you've noted both the fact that you are underfinanced for the fact of the work that you need to do on behalf of Canadians, and you've raised a whole number of recommendations that, for the moment, have not moved anywhere, including that duty to document, access to cabinet confidences, the independent funding mechanism. Would it be fair to say that without the government moving forward on all of those recommendations, that the idea of this government being open by default is simply ridiculous, given that the government has not moved to implement any of the measures that would actually bring us to a more transparent level, particularly when it comes to government procurement?
The amendments to the legislation is definitely something that needs to be done if we want to have a proper system on access to information that's modernized and respect what is going on right now in 2023. The Act was adopted in 1983, so definitely there's a modernization requirement. But there's also a change in culture within the government that needs to be happening. People needs to see transparency as a positive thing, not a negative thing. They have to look at demand access requests not as something that they want to refuse, but something that they wanted to give. And there's also a need for more tools and human resources and training in terms of responding to those access requests are increasing every year. Canadians are asking for more information, and the tools and the resources are not following, not just in my office, but all in all departments. So we need those three big changes to be able to be a government that is the leader in access in the world that we used to be in 1983.
Thank you. That is our time. We're over to you, Mr. Brock, please.
Thank you, Chair. And good afternoon, Madame Maynard. Thank you for your attendance. You spoke about the CBSA of all the government departments having the most active complaints. Can you drill down a little bit more with respect to that analysis and that pronouncement, and specifically how many investigations is your office currently undertaking right now with respect to the ArriveCAN issue?
With respect to the ArriveCAN issues, it's very difficult because sometimes it's not, limited to what happened or the contract. But I think that we have about around 15 to 20 cases that maybe are going to be linked to some of the issues that you're investigating here or dealing with. We have received 654 complaints this year against CBSA, and I still have 536 open complaints with respect to CBSA. Like I said earlier, a lot of them are with respect to immigration files because agents have found that they can ask CBSA information that they could have also asked RCC.
Time, so excuse me for interrupting, but is that the ArriveCAN investigations your office is working on, is that exclusively with the CBSA or other government departments?
There could be others.
There could be others. It could be PHAC, it could be PSPC.
PSPC.
Okay, or others?
Yep.
Relating to ArriveCAN?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you in your opening statement, you expressed a deep dissatisfaction with the evidence that you have heard from the Auditor General and some of the other pieces of evidence I'm sure your office has been made privy to. The Auditor General opined that she's more concerned as to what her report does not indicate. And the highlight there is just the vast mass of missing information. We now have evidence that we have heard in various committees that there are senior executives at the CBSA who are accused of deliberately deleting upwards to 1,700 emails over a 4-year period. And the person in question just happened to be the vice president of the CBSA and the chief information officer for the government of Canada. And he apparently is the only executive at the CBSA that had issues with his email. Does that concern you from a perspective of the ambit and responsibility that you have?
It's definitely a concern when we hear allegations like this.
I understand you ultimately, if you discover any suspicions or any evidence of criminality, you must report not to the RCMP directly, but rather the Attorney General, in this case, the Liberal Attorney General, who is not independent in the role as Minister of Justice. He is a Liberal Minister of Justice. Do you think, given all the evidence that you may or may not be aware, how the Liberal team led by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau actually blocked the ability of the Auditor General to even start an assessment into the audit with respect to the ArriveScam issue? Do you think, given all the efforts, all the attempts by the Liberal bench to block access to information, would you be in a position to completely bypass the Attorney General and actually report directly to Parliament so Canadians, not necessarily the Liberal government, but Canadians can be aware of your concerns? Would you have the legislative authority to report to the House?
I would, because I have the authority under the Access to Information Act to report on special reports if there's something of importance. So, but the referral would only be to the Attorney General, but I could definitely publicize and table a special report if I did such a referral.
And are you prepared to do such a referral?
I could, yes.
Thank you very much. Those are my questions, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Sousa, please, for 5.
Madame Maynard, thank you so much for your review and your proactive assessment of things some years back. We all share your concerns, and I really do appreciate some of your recommendations and your thoughtful manner in which you have identified some of those, how should I say, things that have gone missing, things that have not been done correctly. And it's not just you. We all of you seen the Auditor General has commented on this. The Ombudsman has made recommendations. CBSA and some of the teams have done an internal review because of the same concerns that they see. And of course, your department is where a lot of complaints come. I mean, the existence of the Information Commissioner and the Commission itself is to accommodate many complaints, and that is part of the job. And I appreciate the tremendous amount of pressure that goes into that for you. You've already sort of walked us through the ATIP process with CBSA. We are all, this committee is very concerned with CBSA's activities and some of the shortcomings that have taken place. And we know some of the challenges that you've now identified and addressed. I just want to understand, have you spoken to the Auditor General in regards to your review? And have you spoken to her, given her last report?
No, I haven't.
Have you had a discussion with the Ombudsman in regards to his report and his review?
No, I haven't.
Have you spoken, and I guess you've just mentioned that you wouldn't be able to, but has the RCMP contacted you?
No.
And in all of the activities and the reviews that you've put forward, and you've certainly seen and have commented on the, how should I put this? I'll ask you, have you seen misconduct in the work that you've reviewed? Have you seen civil servants operating illegally? Has there been misconduct by people that are handling these files?
I can't conclude misconduct. I can tell you that in 6 different cases, the commission, the Office of the Commissioner's Information Commissioner, has referred files, information that we found during investigation, under the belief that there was evidence of an intention to commit a crime, and the Attorney General is responsible to continue those investigations. So, as I know, there is no finding or pursuit of these 6 cases.
So you have not reported any misconduct to the House
With
or
respect
to
to
the Attorney General?
CBSA, we're not finalized. We haven't finalized our active cases of it, so we're still investigating.
When do you anticipate finalizing your report on the CBSA?
Well, each file is independent, so it really depends, and we try to do our investigation as quickly as possible. Sometimes it takes 3 months, sometimes it's a year. It really depends on the allegations and the complaints.
So the CBSA is doing a review concurrently, right? They're assessing this very issue, and you have not had discussions with them on this matter?
I cannot discuss how we are doing our investigation and what kind of conversations we are, but I can tell you generally those type of conversations would happen with respect to these files.
Would happen, but it's not happening at this point.
It may. I just can't.
I see. Okay. No. You're right. Now, I know that in this committee we do tend to discuss many things. Many members of the committee are going out of their way to investigate themselves the issues, right? So we understand there's a lot of investigations happening concurrently, and certain individuals are now becoming investigators themselves, and they're going away, talking directly with witnesses, they're talking to various matters and others that are trying to do the investigation, trying to maintain integrity in this investigation, and you have, just by your comment today, maintain integrity. And that's critical in these investigations, so as not to prejudice the outcome and preclude any activity that would then avoid us having a proper resolution. And we need a proper outcome. And I appreciate the work that you're doing in regards to it. And certainly all of us on this committee want to understand the truth. And when we talk about information that's gone missing, then you can't even determine if there was any information in the first place. I guess that's part of your dilemma. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
quick answer, please. Oh, there we go. We have a quick answer. That's your time, Mr. Sousa. We're now going to Mr. Barrett, please.
First minute to Mr. Brock, if I could.
Mr. Brock.
Commissioner, following up on my last line of questioning to you, I want to confirm, are you in a position and will you conduct a special report to Parliament on ArriveCAN? And if so, can you do that by May the 1st of this year?
I cannot confirm that I will. I can only tell you that if I find something in investigation that is worth coming to a Parliament and tabling a special report, this is an authority that I have under the Act. I can do that.
Okay. And the evidence you've heard so far does not rise to that level?
I haven't been able to review the investigation, that evidence that we have found during our investigation.
Okay, thank you. Over to Mr. Barrett.
Is it difficult to destroy government documents and records?
No.
To delete and erase emails, for instance, would you have to do more than just delete it from your inbox?
I think there's backup and there's tapes in some places. It really depends on the departments, but usually people can delete and do proper cleanup of their inbox every day.
And is that information then stored, in your experience, then stored on servers, even if it's deleted from a public servant's inbox or a government email address?
It depends on the retention policy of each departments.
Would you say it requires the intent of the individual to delete it, or do things get deleted by accident?
It could be deleted by accident. It could be deleted intentionally.
Could you give me an example of how something would be accidentally deleted?
I don't know. Like I can somebody going through their inbox and deleting, like cleaning their inbox.
Sure.
I can't.
Do you know what the retention standards are at CBSA for electronic records?
No, I don't.
Do you know if they have any?
They probably, I think most, actually, all departments have to have them.
Are you aware of the allegations that the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer for the Canada Border Services Agency, Mindone, destroyed 1,700 emails related to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's $60 million ArriveScam?
I've heard the news in the media, yes.
And you've said before that that the investigations that you're undertaking are not something that you list on your website, correct?
No.
How many active investigations did you say that you have?
Total,
Yes, ma'am.
we have presently 2,900,
2,900.
yeah,
Okay.
approximately, yeah.
What would it take for a committee, or for what would it take for a committee in the form of instruction to you to be able to have for us to be able to be assured that an investigation were taking place?
I would need a complaint,
You would need a complaint.
yes.
So a request to conduct an investigation isn't sufficient. A complaint to you is required.
Usually, because the investigation has to be linked to an access request that was made, and if the person is unsatisfied with the response or the timelines, they can complain to my office.
And you have received complaints related to the ArriveCAN application.
I cannot say which one and how and what, but yes, generally we have complaints with respect to CBSA.
You have complaints related to CBSA. Is there a, obviously not with the 2,900 ongoing investigations that you have, is there any standard amount of time for your, the conclusion of your investigations, that a service standard that you have in your office?
We try to do, depending if it's a timeline issue, delay complaints, it's within 90 days. If it's a refusal, exemptions, or missing records, that could go up to 6 to 9 months.
So up to 9 months for missing records. But if, for example, you
That's the standard, and depending on how.
that's the standard.
That's it.
And then if you saw fit, then you could table with Parliament your findings if you deemed that it was what was the standard in the public interest, or
If it's a matter that I believe the Parliament should be aware of, I have the authority to table special reports. So if it's something that I believe that not just the institution or the complainant should be aware of, I can use a special report to provide that information to Parliament.
Well, I very much appreciate your responses and trust that you having been here today indicates Parliament's keen interest in your work with relation to CBSA and missing documents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Kuzmierczak, and then we'll finish up with Mrs. Vignola and then Mr. Julian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here with us this afternoon, and thank you so much for your excellent answers and shedding some important light. You I guess a few months ago, you met with frequent users of the ATIP process, or frequent users of your office, for a feedback session, and I just wanted to ask, what are some of the comments that you heard from the folks that utilize the ATIP process and utilize the help of your office? What did you hear from them in terms of how we can improve things moving forward?
The consultation you're referring to is a consultation we did with respect to our own process and make sure that we are responding to, that we understand the client's or the complainant's view on how we can make it easier for them. So definitely there's going to be, some of the comments was they want our investigation to go faster, they want more information on our website, they want to understand the process better. Having more conversation with our investigators frequently. This is something we just received the feedback from the company that did the consultations, and we're going to be making the report public and the response of our office public as well.
Out of those suggestions, is there one that you feel ought to be prioritized, or that you've discussed with your team that ought to be prioritized in the near future?
Yeah, we haven't had the chance to even have a discussion yet, but we also have to be aware of the resources issue. So I want to do my investigation faster, so we have to find ways to be more efficient with the resources that we have.
Wonderful, and I'm actually really pleased to hear that you organize that type of platform and gather that type of feedback from the folks that utilize your services. So kudos to you for doing that. I just wanted to ask you, how independent is your office, is the Office of the Information Commissioner? How independent are you from government, from politics?
I'm fully independent. I can tell you that, except for the funding.
How appropriate is it for a member of Parliament, as we just seen a few minutes ago, directing you to conduct investigations on an issue?
Well, this is a reason why I cannot accept a request for an investigation. But if a complaint comes to me from anybody, including members of Parliament, this is something that we definitely can investigate.
Excellent. I wanted to ask you, what percentage of all requests made, ATIP requests made, end up becoming complaints that are sent to your office?
About 5%.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
5% of all requests.
About 5%, yes. Can you give us a sense relative to some of our peer countries? Is that good? Is that bad? Can you give us a sense of what 5% means? So out of all the ATIP requests that are submitted, 5% end up as complaints in your office. Can you give us a sense? Is that high? Is that low? Is that average in terms of peer jurisdictions?
I have no idea with respect to other countries. I can tell you I'm the most busy Access to Information Commissioner in Canada.
Certainly. Okay, it would be really helpful if at some point you might be able to find that information out in terms of how to be compared with other jurisdictions and other countries as well too. That would be quite helpful if you're able to send that. I wanted to ask you how you handle high volume requesters. We know that there's situations, for example, where an individual may request dozens, if not hundreds of requests. Is there a special approach that you take to high volume requesters?
We try to talk to them and decide with them which one to prioritize. So we have a very open conversation with these requesters so that they know that we can't all investigate 19, let's say, or 50, or sometimes 100 cases for one requester or one complainant. So we try to work with the person and prioritize those complaints.
Commissioner, I really do appreciate how you go back and forth with the folks that utilize the ATIP and information systems. That's really encouraging to hear. I did have one final question. Mr. Chair, do I have any time left?
10 seconds.
10 seconds. Commissioner, really quickly, this committee has asked for hundreds of thousands of documents to be produced. Can you provide any advice to a body like the committee that often asks agencies to produce hundreds of thousands of documents over the course of mere months on a specific issue? Do you have any advice how we might be able to help out the folks that are producing those documents in terms of how we craft the requests?
Real quick answer.
I think you just need to make sure you ask for the proper information, like in scope, the subject you want to have the information for.
Thanks very much. Mrs. Vignola, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My question is the one that I wanted to ask from the outset. I really want to know this. In the case of ArriveCAN and in the contracting out by GC Strategies to other firms, if it was, no, that's not a good question. Let me say, I'll put it in another way. When you look at what happened with ArriveCAN, GC Strategies contracted out to KPMG, two guys in their basement. When you have contractors who let subcontracts, and it just goes on and on, how can you analyze transparency in this? Really, because it seems to me it's difficult to ascertain. It really depends on the contract. There are contracts that I can't speak to, but there are contracts where we have seen clauses where it specifies that the contractor will let subcontracts, and in other contracts and other agreements, it's the inverse. Well, how can it be that some will say, everything you're going to give me will be accessible, and in others contracts that certain information will be hidden? It is the contractor himself, the contracting entity, that would decide. I can't speak to that. Are there members? Well, I've made a submission to extend the number of agents possible. I want to know how many contractors, subcontractors are using public funds, and say, for example, in PCO, in the PMO, in the whole country. I want to establish an extent to which this is happening. Have you had an answer? Well, open contracting, not before 2025.
Mr. Julian, to finish things up, please.
Thank you very much, Madame Minat, for your service on behalf of Canadians. I want to come back to an earlier question. You said, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, 536 existing files on CBSA, 654 complaints that you would be examining. That leads us to a total of 1,190 complaints of CBSA, both presently and ongoing. Are those figures correct? And if so, they're astounding. And does CBSA seem to engender more complaints than any other part of government? Is this looking at your overall number of complaints, seems to be beating other departments? Is that true?
So currently, we have received 654. We have 536 active cases remaining in our inventory against CBSA, and it is the number one institutions on top of the most complaints received this year. And I have to say, this is why I started a systemic investigation with respect to CBSA to find out the root cause. And this is a special report that we're going to be tabling in May with respect to that investigation.
And thank you for your work on this. This is something that obviously requires transparency. And it is astounding to me that CBSA has been so negligent in responding to the requirement for information. For CBSA and for other government departments, for something like a sole source contract, like the one we have with ArriveCAN, what information should they be keeping to ensure that we know what Canadians have spent on those contracts, who did the work, and why those contracting decisions were made?
Like any government institution that is doing contracting, including my office, there are rules with respect to contracting. There's controls in place. I believe that any decisions like this should be well documented. This discussion with respect to amendments of the contract should be as well recorded. These records are, like I said earlier, the documents are being asked, and we should be able to provide Canadians with as much information as how much the public funds are being spent and how.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Ms. Maynard, thank you again for joining us. I appreciate your time. I look forward to hearing are receiving your list of perhaps legislative changes we can put through to empower your department. I just have one question, if colleagues will allow me, before you go, and you may have answered it, but it wasn't clear. If you're satisfied that there are grounds to investigate a matter regarding ATIPs or missing information, do you have the authority to self-initiate a complaint, or does it have to come from an outside body, so to speak?
This is a good question. I do have the authority to initiate my own complaints if I don't see a complaint within my inventory on the issue.
Okay, wonderful. Colleagues, I'm going to excuse our witness. Before we suspend and get to the next issue, I just need quick permission. We'd asked for witnesses for Canada Post. We have not received any. So I'm asking we just extend to a week this Friday at noon. So another 8 days for Canada Post witnesses, if we're okay.
So moved.
Okay. Thank you very much.
We sent you witnesses. For Canada Post.
We are suspending for about 5 minutes and we'll come back. So I have
For those of you that are new to the channel, like and subscribe. Share the video so that we can help fight against the algorithm, since they seem to be trying to suppress the channel. They are adjourned for 5 minutes. They'll be right back. I think what Pierre needs to do when he becomes prime minister is to make sure that the people that have caused the corruption in our government, including Justin Trudeau, they actually get arrested. And they need to be arrested so that future governments know that if they do something like this, there's consequences. There's no accountability in the government, and that's an issue. Well, I think once Pierre becomes prime minister, if he's solid about, moving Canada forward and stopping the corruption, he will pass laws to make it so that prime ministers after him are held to account, so that Canadians don't have to suffer anymore underneath these kind of governments. This is the problem, is like way back when everybody wanted Harper out back in the day. They're like, yeah, Justin Trudeau or whatever, because wokeness was just walking in and people were falling for it. So everyone voted for Trudeau, especially young females. And boom, now look what we have. We have a dictator. They want to censor our speech. It's brutal. Did you guys see Pierre had a press conference this morning? Did any of you guys see it? You can tell that Pierre's getting pissed off too. Well, he also has kids that are in this country. I'd be a little concerned as well. Basically, it is, but let's hope that Pierre is solid and we don't have any future issues when he becomes prime minister. I hope to God he becomes prime minister, because I don't know if I can handle any more Trudeau. Could you imagine Trudeau getting reelected again? What the hell would we do? You might as well just kiss your ass goodbye, because there'll be no country left if Trudeau gets back in. Yeah, I was at the health food store. Well, they're trying to ban anything good. Like, they want to get rid of health products. Some people actually use those health products and they swear by them. I mean, they work for people. You should have choice. This government seems to want to eliminate choice for some reason. They got like this one-eye view, and they want you to live in that view. That's it. No steering away from it. You're not allowed health products. Just like you gotta. They want to dictate what you can and cannot say. It's bananas, man. And yet left-wingers think that we live in a free country. Yet we did. The problem is that it's becoming non-free. We're not going to be free here soon. We keep living under this government. We'll have to watch everything we say, because somebody's going to get offended by it, and one of us will end up in jail saying something that offended them. You won't be able to buy your health products anymore. Only your Justin Trudeau pharmaceuticals. Like, this is this country, man. I once loved my country, and I was proud of my country. And now it's like, man, if I could move out of here, I'd be gone. Yeah, Trudeau's just making the pharmaceutical companies super rich. That's all he's doing. They think some people think it's because they're trying to destigmatize certain things like drug addicts and whatnot. Well, I don't think it's that at all. I think that he's getting kickbacks, major kickbacks from having government-funded pharmaceutical drugs being handed out on the streets. The Trudeau government is like the largest crime syndicate in this country. but it's not crime because they tell you it's not crime. Forget about what you used to know. It's about what you're told to know now. That's the thing, like, even if you had more gun owners, would it make a big deal? No, probably not, because nobody stands up. Everybody hides. Like the United States, I'm surprised they haven't done anything yet. But people are too afraid to. They're too divided and separated. They're too afraid to do anything about it. Yeah, we got to get Trudeau out of there. Somehow. I don't know if we're all going to last until next year. Next year, when in October? Like, oh my God. I think when the convoy came, more people should have supported it. And, you know, everyone's kicking themselves in the ass now. Because it was probably one of the biggest movements in this country. And if it had more support, we probably would have accomplished something. I know that it annoyed some people in Ottawa, but you know what? That's the thing when you live in a capital city. You're gonna have protests. Some are gonna be nuts. You know, if all hell was to break loose on Justin Trudeau, guess what city's gonna take the brunt of it? Ottawa. Well, you know, countries there's a lot of changes are coming and people don't realize they need to wake up to the fact that there are some changes coming, and they're not going to be good changes either, because you got countries dumping the United States dollar like crazy. By mid next month, you know, the United States is supposed to be put into a heavy recession, like a bad recession. It's starting to pop up around the world, and you know, they're trying to keep it secret from you until it's too late. And it's coming here. I'd say we're already in a recession. They try to deny it with fudged numbers. They say, oh yeah, job numbers are great. They're great. Well, most of those jobs are retail jobs, fast food jobs, and they're filled by immigrants, non-residents.
Hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move that the committee continue the debate on Mr. Scheer's motion and the amendment of Mr. Genuis and the sub-amendment of Madame Vignola.
Thank you, colleagues. It's a dilatory motion, so we'll have a quick vote unless we're all in agreement. I see one thumbs up. Mr. Julian, are you okay to resume? Great. We will resume the debate on the motion. I see Mrs. Vignola.
Monsieur Chair, I'm going to, well, this morning I sent to most members, most committee members, Mr. Julian, Mr. Pack. I also hope you received it, a sub-amendment, a sub-amendment, but I'm going to ask for unanimous consent from my colleagues to allow me to withdraw the sub-amendment that I brought in yesterday, to allow me to table the one that I had in mind this morning.
Amendment and then issue a new one. Are we fine with that, members? I see nods. Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Jouari. It is withdrawn. And now you're going to propose a sub-amendment that, and you've sent it to the clerk?
Oui. Il a été envoyé au
Yes, it was sent to the clerk. I would like to say that to my colleagues, but
It's gone out. Nods, yes or no?
Monsieur le Président,
Chair, I would ask Madame Vignola just to read it, just to be sure. I've got a lot of paper in front of me, and so I want to be sure I have the right motion or the right amendment.
Yeah, I just want to make sure everyone has it before she gets into it because it's a lengthy one. I will now turn the floor back to Mrs. Vignola.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say that I'm going to be reading it in French. The reference pages for the book of procedure are not the same in the English version. I translated the English myself because I didn't have the procedural book in English, so I'm going to read the motion in French, and that is the one that to which we will have to adhere. That the committee make a report to the House that, and I give context here, on November 2, that summonses were sent to government by the Government Operations Committee, OGGO, to the proprietors of GC Strategies, Christian Firth and Darren Anthony. The latter refused to appear before the committee. Second, that it has been revealed that GC Strategies received about $20 million in government contracts for ArriveCAN, and that the dates for which
Une enquête de la GRC a
Sorry, we've
actuellement.
lost translation. If you could just...
Unfortunately, the interpreters are just receiving that motion.
Are we ready to go again?
J'ai une version en anglais papier, si ça peut les aider.
I'll get you to restart at 3 once they're ready. Okay, they're ready to go. Do you mind restarting at 3? The data on the open government?
3. The data on the Open Government website is said to be subject to errors, which casts further doubt on the amounts that GC Strategies, in particular, might have received in government contracts since 2015. 4. An RCMP investigation is currently taking place, notably implicating the owners of GC Strategies.
De comparaître.
Refusal to appear. A. According to Bosque, Marc, and Gagnon-André, the Procedure and Practice of the House of Commons, 3rd edition, 2017, page 317. If a witness declines an invitation, the committee may issue him a subpoena by adopting a motion to this effect. If the witness still refuses to appear, the committee may refer the matter to the House, or which may then order the witness to appear. If the witness disobeys the order, he or she could be found in contempt. I'm still referring to Bosque and Gagnon. Procedure and Practices of the House, 3rd edition, 2017. The basis of power to punish contempt, whether it is a contempt of court or chambers, is that courts and chambers must be able to protect themselves against acts which directly or indirectly hinder the exercise of their functions. As small I, Bosque, Marc, and Gagnon-André, Procedure and House Practices at page 119. The House must itself decide on its intervention, the intervention that it makes. Requests. In order to see the witnesses in committee to testify, those steps are requested. First step, the committee requests and recommends that an order of the House do issue requiring Christian Firth and Darren Anthony each to appear before the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates on dates and times to be determined by the chair of the committee, but within 21 days of the adoption of this order and with such accessibility accommodations that the witnesses may request and the chair agree to arrange. Second step, after those 21 days, if the chair of the committee informs the speaker and the sergeant-at-arms in writing that one or both have failed to appear and ordered, the sergeant-at-arms shall take Christian Firth, Darren Anthony, or both of them, as the case may be, into his custody for the purposes of enforcing their attendance before the committee at dates and times determined by the chair of the committee, which the speaker shall issue the warrant accordingly. B, the sergeant-at-arms shall discharge from his custody the witness taken into his, and so on. And C, the speaker shall inform the House at the earliest opportunity of developments in this regard. So I've tried to find middle ground here in this new amendment. I've tried to respect the witnesses. I have tried to respect the sensitive situation in which they find themselves. And we, of course, are trying to accommodate them, but also we must respect the procedure of the House. We don't want to be called. We don't want to be called harassers of witnesses. So that is behind my sub-amendment, and that is what I have based my sub-amendment on, keeping all of that in mind.
Well, I've got a speakers list, Mr. Kuzmierczak, Mr. Shawari, and Mr. Souza. Is this on the Mrs. Vignola's sub-amendment? Yeah, please go ahead, Mr. Kuzmierczak. You can't amend a sub-amendment.
Okay, was just trying to find the unmute button there. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I wanted to say thank you to my colleague, Madame Vignola, for bringing forward or working with us to try to bring forward a path forward that tries to balance what are the two interests that we have at heart here. And again, I just want to reiterate the fact that everyone around the table here wants to see us get to the bottom of this issue. We absolutely want answers. We believe that there are parties to this investigation, in this case, ArriveCAN, that have to answer some questions that we have. And the best way to do that is again, to do that, come before the OGGO committee and to stand here and answer some of the questions. They are answerable. And there have been, over the last we've been studying this issue now for 5 months. But in the last few weeks, we've had testimony from the AG, from the procurement ombudsman, from the CBSA executive director, and that have raised additional questions. No doubt about it, have raised additional questions. And so it makes sense that we want to bring the witnesses here, additional witnesses here, to answer some of the questions that that we have here. So on the one hand, we're all united in wanting to do that, and we all supported the request to have Mr. Firth and to have Mr. Anthony, I believe, from GC Strategies come here before the House. We supported that. At the same time, so we want to see that. We want to see that meeting to take place. It is important. It is critical that these two gentlemen appear in front of the OGGO committee and to face the questions that we no doubt have, to shed additional light as we try to get answers here and get to the bottom of things. At the same time, it's important to emphasize that we did, as was reported, I want to be careful about what I say here because this is a delicate situation. And so I want to be very careful about what we say here. And I want to be very careful about individual persons' health issues and the sensitive information that has been shared. I will speak about what was reported publicly. I feel comfortable speaking about that, and there was, of course, information already in a Globe and Mail article that talked about the mental health challenges of the folks that have been called to appear, and health issues, I guess I should say, and health issues. We take those concerns very seriously. And so we're in a situation where the competing sort of interests, the pull and tug, I guess, of the two interests that we have is, on the one hand, we want to see that the witnesses come here. On the other hand, we do respect someone who steps forward and shares their personal health concerns with us, and we have to take that into consideration. And we're trying to find the balance here. And I stated yesterday, and when I spoke, that is what we're trying to weigh here. And I believe that the sub-amendment that is brought forward, amended sub-amendment, or the changed, edited sub-amendment, but by Madame Vignol, I believe it does advance us towards a path. But I still don't think we're there yet. And I'll tell you why. The nuclear button option, as Madame Vignol herself described, which is asking the sergeant at arms to take into custody the witnesses, is a drastic move. And I say that because we have, at least in my recent memory, we have not seen a committee utilize that option, as far as I know, in a very, very long time. I know there was an article recently in the Globe and Mail, or excuse me, no, I believe it was in the National Post, that talked about the last time that a speaker utilized this prerogative of summoning the sergeant at arms. And it says here, if I can read this, because I think this is important, former Speaker Peter Milliken used the power in 2007, 17 years ago, to force police authorities to hand over arms dealer Karl-Heinz Schreiber to the sergeant at arms. At the time, the House of Commons Ethics Committee was looking into the hundreds of thousands of dollars Schreiber had given to former Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. And so this is from, I believe it's from the National Post, if I'm not mistaken. So this is not a tool that we use frequently. It's not a tool that is used often. In fact, it's used rarely in exceptional circumstances. And so I think we have to sort of, I think we have to be cautious in terms of reaching for that tool. Do I think it's appropriate in this instance? At this point, I think that there are certain steps that we have not taken, that we're missing a few steps before we reach for that exceptional tool. I mean, folks, in essence, what we're asking to do is we're asking the sergeant at arms to, it says here, to take into custody, arrest someone who has shared with us, as has been reported, information about their that they cannot appear because of serious health issues. serious health issues, which I'm not going to go into detail with because we're trying to respect, again, please understand, we're trying to respect personal privacy here.
Can I interrupt
especially
first,
on health
Mr.
issues?
Kuzmierczak?
Sure.
Maybe we can just agree as a committee. We've all read the letter. We will just agree. We'll agree as a committee. We'll just refer to it for simplicity's sake as the health reasons to avoid
Excellent.
perhaps going past where we need to. Thanks, colleagues.
No, Mr. Chair, I really do appreciate that guidance, actually, because again, we're trying to share with folks that are watching, following this case, what it is we're grappling with here. And as you said yourself, Chair, the 3 people that are watching, including your family. But it is important for folks watching to understand what it is we're grappling with here. We're trying to be respectful of personal information, especially related to health. So we're going to just refer to it as, is it health concerns? Yes? Health issues or health matters. So that's what we're trying to figure out here. And so I think one of the steps that we had suggested or we had discussed in the last meeting was, I believe a step before that is to have confirmation from a doctor or physician to provide that information to verify or confirm the extent of those health concerns and provide, for example, both either a timeline for when we can when it would be appropriate to bring those witnesses to testify at the most earliest date, but at the same time, perhaps even spell out what are some of the accommodations that should be introduced here to again accommodate the folks that we're trying to bring here into committee. And I appreciate Madame Vinola actually including that in her motion, talking about working with the chair to in terms of determining which accommodations need to be brought forward, again, to address some of the health issues and the health concerns here. And so I think that's sort of where we're at right now in terms of our conversation. I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of summoning someone who has a health concern. Asking the sergeant at arms to do that. Again, we call it, taking into custody, but it sure as heck sounds a lot like arresting. In from what I'm seeing there, I mean, that seems like a very drastic move. And so I think we want to find that balance here, and I'm not sure if we're there yet. And again, I want to emphasize just how absolutely rare it is to utilize this particular power. And as has been stated before, committees and members of parliament have powers almost unlimited in so many ways. But I think we have to be judicious in terms of how we do that. I also wanted to talk a little bit about something that I began talking about yesterday, but I didn't get a chance to finish. And I think it's really important here because in addition to being sensitive about this particular issue, I really believe strongly that we need to couch our discussions in facts. And, around this table, I get it. There's a lot of politics at play here. And so obviously we know how this works. This isn't anything new around the sun. Folks say things for political advantage. Facts, for example, are oftentimes used for various purposes. But I think it's important on an issue as important as this that gets to the heart of the challenges that are facing our procurement processes. I think it's really important if we are to be serious and if we are to do the people's work to fix these issues, to fix the issues that clearly the Auditor General has spelled out in stark light, in black and white. And if we are to address these issues, the issues that the procurement ombudsman has spelled out, the issues of process, I think we need to couch our discussions in fact. And sometimes fact is not the loudest. In fact, I think there's an inverse relationship when you often hear politicians screaming and yelling and whatnot. Oftentimes, that screaming and yelling is inversely proportional to fact. and oftentimes it's the facts that sort of quietly, quietly are sort of established. But we need to speak about those facts. And we talk about the ArriveCAN app. I hear this repeated, not just in this council chambers. I hear it repeated in newspapers. I hear it repeated on the national, on discussions, repeated by opinion makers, that the ArriveCAN app cost $80,000 and that the cost of the ArriveCAN ballooned to $50 million. And I really want to get into the record here because it is really important, I believe, that we establish the facts here when we talk about this. And again, it's really important so that we can focus on what is the issue at hand, which is the fact that processes were not strong enough. They had gaps, serious gaps and oversights and processes and documentation. That's the focus of what we're getting at here. And so the original, I really want to quickly run through this because it bears repeating, and I didn't get a chance to complete it the last time I had an opportunity to speak. And this is called, the document is called Border Public Health Measure Costs from April 1st, 2020 through to March 31st, 2023. And it's ArriveCAN related forecasts and actuals. You can find this document. It's a one-page document on the CBSA website. And it talks about the fact that, yes, the original version of the ArriveCAN app was $80,000. But where did the other costs go to? And that includes, and the other costs include all the back-end things that make the ArriveCAN app work. And so I'll give you an example. There was a Service Canada call center that needed to be stood up. And this was to accept calls and emails from travelers on the COVID health measures in general and the app that could be answered by PHAC and CBSA. That was $6.1 million is the actual cost. $7.5 million was forecast for the Service Canada call center.
Sorry, we have a point of order, Mr. Kuzmierczuk.
I'm listening very carefully. It's just riveting information coming from my colleague, but now we're getting into areas that are completely irrelevant to the motion at hand.
Filibuster.
Yes. Mr. Brock has a point. We are debating the sub-amendment, but perhaps you could, we always give wide latitude, but perhaps you could bring it back to the sub-amendment.
Sure, I am. And again, I thank you, Chair. I appreciate what my colleague is stating here. But, again, I've heard our debates and our discussions on this issue, and I've heard certain things. And I want us to go back to the facts and establish the facts. It's important that we couch our discussions in fact, including folks that are listening, that are those who craft opinion and share this information, what we're debating here with the general public. So I think it's really important for us, before we proceed on this important vote and important motion, that we at the same time establish those facts. And so Service Canada call center, and I'll do this once. I'm not going to do it again, but.
Again,
sorry, Mr. Kuzmierczuk, another point of order. Mr. Brock.
Again, I am reiterating the whole concept of lack of relevancy to the motion at hand. This is a motion regarding compelling witnesses to attend at committee who have ignored previous summons to appear. It has got nothing to do with educating Canadians, according to my colleague, about all the circumstances surrounding government spending on the ArriveCAN.
Thanks, Mr. Brock.
We know that they've wasted $60 million of taxpayer funds. This is clearly an attempt to filibuster on irrelevant issues. So I'm asking, Mr. Chair, that he get to the point and speak to the issues surrounding the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. Mr. Kuzmierczuk, I'll turn the floor back to you. Again, we allow wide latitude, obviously, in our discussions, but if you could please swing back to the sub-amendment.
No, and I appreciate that. I appreciate your latitude, Mr. Chair. And again, I believe my colleague proved my point by his comments. We want to establish the facts here, and Canadians want to know what the $60 million was spent on. And so that's what I'm trying to establish here, because it's important as we move forward, especially as we bring witnesses here to ask questions. We want to make sure that our questions are sharp, they're crisp, and they're focused on and they're based in fact. So again, if I can just I just want to get through this list here, and if I can establish that, we'll move on. And again, I wasn't able to complete that last meeting, and I just want to get through it here today. So again, $80,000 to create the app, the original app, the very first initial version, version 1. And keep in mind, there were 177 versions of this app as it needed to evolve to the situation, changing situations on the ground. Service Canada call center was stood up. $6.1 million was the actual cost of that to handle questions related to the app, related to folks that were crossing the border, questions that could be answered by PHAC, Public Health Agency of Canada, and CBSA. Data management. There was a lot of data collected. You know, the Conservatives often like to say that this app didn't work. Well, the app was downloaded 60 million times. 60 million times. Imagine the mountain of data that was collected. And so as part of the ArriveCAN app, a data management center was stood up. Again, the cost, $7.9 million. The forecast was $5.2 million. The actual cost was $7.9 million. And this is for PHAC and CBSA to collect data, report, monitor, and ensure compliance with COVID border measures. You could imagine all that data, the mountain of data collected, 60 million times used. And you could imagine that the data needed to be shared not just with CBSA but PHAC, but had to be shared almost instantly with every single health agency of every province and territory across the country. And so that's another cost that was related to that. There's also data storage and cloud services. Again, 60 million travelers, 18 million downloads over 2 years, $6.4 million for storing the data securely. We all know the error and terror of data breaches. You could imagine someone crossing the border, providing through the ArriveCAN app personal health information, and the need to have security, need to have that data managed in a secure way, shared with hundreds, if not thousands of other agency partners across Canada through public health agencies, and needing to do that securely. That's $6.4 million for data storage cloud service. IT support. This is a technical call center for airlines, airport, and travelers for the app. That's $5.4 million. Security to ensure it meets Government of Canada standards on cybersecurity, $2.4 million. Accessibility to make sure that persons with disabilities are able to cross the border, to travel, and to utilize the ArriveCAN app was an additional $2.3 million to make sure that the app was accessible. There's program and project management costs, future ready.
Chair, excuse me, Chair. Chair. With all the respect that I have for my colleague, this description of the use of ArriveCAN during the worst of the pandemic, is there any linkage at all with the appearance or the request for appearance of the witnesses here before our committee?
Thank you, Ms. Vignola. Mr. Kuzmierczuk, if you could please come back to the sub-amendment.
Well, again, going back to the sub-amendment and the motion that we're discussing here, obviously we're talking about the contracts related to ArriveCAN. This is about the contracts related to ArriveCAN. And so I am trying to establish some facts, which is what does the $60 million costs, what are they actually, when you break them down, what is it about? Because when you listen to some of my opposition colleagues, they state in their discussions here on camera in this meeting today that you had an $80,000 app that became a $60 million app. And that is false. That is false. That is not accurate. That is not sharing accurate information with Canadians. And so what I wanted to do is to break down what is the actual $60 million. Yes, $80,000 for the original app itself. But the $60 million was because of all the other back-end services and centers that needed to be stood up in order to make the app functional. And the reason why is it important to make the app functional? It's important to make the app functional. I'll give you an example. I'm a border member of parliament, border MP. I've got the Ambassador Bridge right in my backyard. Why is that important to me? It's important to me because the Ambassador Bridge is the conduit for 1/3 of all trade between Canada and the United States. $180 billion of goods travel across that border every single year. You're talking millions, over 2 million trucks cross the border carrying all sorts of goods, whether it's car parts, whether it's medicine, whether it's food, equipment. And so that 137 or $180 billion, 137 American, 180 billion Canadian dollars that travels the border is important because it actually undergirds hundreds of billions of dollars more of economic activity. And so the seamless travel of traffic across the border is very important, not just to me as a border MP, but is important to Canadians who rely on the $180 billion of goods arriving and traveling across that border every single day. That's important. And so I take issue when I hear colleagues saying it's an $80,000 app that became a $60 million app. That's not accurate. And I take issue with colleagues that say the app does not work. I've heard that almost a dozen times that it doesn't work. 60 million travelers downloaded it 18 million times. It was used by folks to make sure that the traffic across the border in my hometown travels seamlessly across the border. Because the difference, the old system, the paper system, what that would have done if we didn't have the ArriveCAN app, if we were dependent on the old paper system or even verbally answering questions by the border officers, that would have tied up traffic on that border. And if you add minutes to every single vehicle that traveled that border, that would have downstream impacts, not just on my community, but on Canadian commerce, Canadian business, and Canadian health and quality of life. So there are certain things we need to establish here when we're talking about this. We take the ArriveCAN issue very seriously here, but I've heard this discussion, unfortunately, being sidetracked by certain comments that are just not accurate. And I think we need to get back to the facts, and that's why it was important for me to read it. And the total tally, if you look at this document provided by CBSA, is $55 million. We know that number can't be confirmed because there are serious questions about the accuracy of the documentation. We know that there's serious questions about the accuracy, the documentation, the financial tracking and records. That is the real problem. But I want us to laser focus on that problem and maybe park the politics on the side a little bit when we're having this serious conversation about real challenges in the procurement process in Canada. And I wanted to read one more thing into the record. There was an article that appeared in the Globe and Mail today by David McLaughlin, who is the president and CEO of the Institute of Governance. He is a former clerk of the Executive Council and Cabinet Secretary in Manitoba. And he writes here, and I want to read this because I think it's really important to read here. It says here, quote unquote, by almost any objective measure, the public service has not adapted to meet the heightened demands of citizens when it comes to service delivery. That's the quote here to begin with. It's not his quote. It says here, this isn't a quote from last week's damning report on the ArriveCAN app scandal by the Auditor General, but it could have been. It's from a December report to the Clerk of the Privy Council, Canada's top public servant, on values and ethics in the public service. And this is important here. And this is Mr. McLaughlin's words. The ArriveCAN scandal
Sorry
was
to interrupt, Mr. Kuzmierczak. I have a point of order. Mr. Barrett?
Chair, the debate is on a sub-amendment, and the member hasn't mentioned the subject of the sub-amendment, which is GC strategies or their appearance at committee in some time. It would be it would be equally irrelevant for me to use this time to opine about Justin Trudeau's $60 million Arrive scam, an app that was supposed to cost $80,000 but cost $60 million. But Chair, I know that the Liberals have a political problem that they're looking to solve with this filibuster, but we need to get back to debate on the sub-amendment, which I might add, the honourable colleague from the bloc did consult all parties on this in advance. So this was shopped around, made available in both official languages, and the Liberals are still shamefully filibustering this accountability mechanism.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Kusmirchuk, the floor is yours, but please can we stay on topic or close to the topic of the sub-amendment, please?
Yes, and I'm almost there. And I promise, Mr. Chair, I thank you for your latitude once again. I really appreciate it. That's the Edmonton kindness, kind-heartedness that is showing through, and I really do appreciate that. And so I just wanted to say, just wanted to finish again. I'll finish here with this quote from David McLaughlin, again, President and CEO of Institute on Governance, who says, and again, I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Barrett, because again, he made my point for me once again with his comments, and trying to connect it to, trying to connect this issue to ministers and elected officials. And I want to read here. This is why it's important from Mr. McLaughlin. This is what he writes. The ArriveCAN scandal was a failure of public servants, not politicians. While ministers are still accountable to Parliament for this failing, the public service was responsible. That's important. That's important. And this is what the Auditor General, this is what the Auditor General, it's what the Procurement Ombudsman, it's what the CBSA Executive Director has been pointing to in their work, and in where they have shined their spotlight and their flashlight. This is what they found, is that this is a failure of process at the level of public service. This is a failure. These are shortcomings and failures and gaps, significant, egregious gaps at the level of officials, at the level of public servants, at the level of bureaucrats. And this is what needs to be fixed. And this is where we need to focus. And my colleagues will try their hardest to make that connection with elected officials. But the issue here is we need to look hard and focus our flashlight not on politics, but on facts. It's the only way we're going to solve this issue and make the procurement process better. And this is the only way that we're actually going to do the report of the AG service and to respect the hard work of the AG, of the Auditor General, is if we are laser focused on facts, laser focused on what is the issue, put the politics aside and for a moment and do the work that the Canadians expect us to do here. And so with that, again, I wanted to say that I wanted to reiterate once again, I appreciate the work of Madame Vignola. And she always has a way to listen to the folks around the table, bring opinions together, and try to find the path forward. I wanted to say thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kusmirchuk. I have Mr. Shawari next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and let me pick up where my colleague MP Kusmirchuk left by starting thanking Julie. So Julie reached across the aisle, and I'm sure reached across and had an opportunity to talk to everyone. And she did indeed reach out to me, and we had a fruitful conversation. I raised a number of concerns around the preamble, and she listened carefully, and she explored, and the recommendations that she's made within the changes that she's made to the preamble is something that I'm a lot more comfortable with. I'm not 100% there yet, but I'm a lot more comfortable. And she also took a step to reach out to others. I believe she She might have reached out to the Office of Sergeant at Arms trying to get some clarification. I did my part as well, trying to understand the scope of the work, in the scope and the magnitude and the impact of what we are asking. Is it within the scope of the Sergeant at Arms? Does the Sergeant at Arms has that mandate, or is he capable of carrying that mandate, etc.? A lot of clarification has been made. So thank you, Julie. And I think this is an example of how should we move forward when we want to bring a motion that we kind of circulated beforehand. We have a conversation, we listen to each other's concern, and we worked collaboratively together. So once again, thank you. Second point is, I want to hear from GC Strategy. I want to hear from those two partners. There's no ifs and buts, okay? And I want to hear from them more now than ever, especially with the report that Auditor General put out. And I want to hear from them again when we will be in a position to receive the report for an internal audit that CBSA is doing. And I want to hear from them again after any type of investigation, whether true or not, etc. Any type is there by RCMP. Now, so we are very much interested to hear from them. We've also heard that there are concerns around health that we need to be aware of. So we were made aware through channels, which again we cannot talk about it because of the privacy and integrity of the essence that we are the situation that we are dealing with. Very much like what Eric said, I also want to hear from those medical professionals that have provided that guidance to the legal bodies. And the main reason not to understand what the condition, I just want to understand what's the impact of something like this. As Eric said, and as Madam Julie has said, this is like a little nuclear bomb launch.
Point of order, Chair.
Red button. So,
sorry, Mr. Shawari. Point of order, Mr. Brock.
So all I have heard so far from my colleague, Mr. Jawari, is essentially the same talking points from his colleague. And to get to the point, perhaps Mr. Jawari and all other Liberal members who want to use the same tactics of filibustering can stop wasting time and simply file their recommendations and concerns to the committee so we can actually get to the actual motion itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. Not sure that's a point of order, but I'm sure Mr. Jari will take it to heart and continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we'll be on this for a while. So here we go. Coming into understanding that I like to hear from those health providers. I also like to actually get an acknowledgement that those health providers have provided guidance to the legal, and legal has understood it and has communicated to the best, with the focus of understanding what the impact of such an action is. I want him here. I'll be very, it's very simple. We want those two founders to be here and answer questions. But we want to make sure that we neither jeopardize the integrity nor the health as they've used it. So I need to get an understanding of that. Now, what safeguards do we have and what safeguards do we install? So we acknowledge that we've repeatedly reached out to those two individuals, and initially it was for many, again, I can't go to the detail, but we've reached out and we have been unsuccessful. And this thing needs to stop, especially now that we have one report out that we can get to the bottom of it and we can ask some relevant question vis-a-vis that study as AG studies. So what safeguards do we have to make sure? We've talked about accommodation, which is fair. but I'm talking about safeguards for even safeguards for the Office of the Sergeant at Arms in the pursuit of being able to bring those individuals under custody, and while under custody prior to those individuals appearing at the committee, what safeguards do we have to be able to protect the office, protect the sergeant at arms, as well as protect the health and well-being of these individuals so they can show up. So I still have questions. I'm still pursuing, trying to get an understanding of, for example, what will happen if the sergeant at arms become in a position of bringing those two individuals in custody on a Friday afternoon, and this committee doesn't sit until Monday. Are we calling an emergency meeting on Friday night, which I don't have a problem with, and coming in, or are we going to put these individuals in some sort of custody, whether it's going to be through our CMP? I haven't got those because this is I haven't got an understanding of those because these are real situations. We've seen how individuals have behaved when they were dealing with health issues and they were confronted with a situation that they were being arrested. So what I'm talking about is not prolonging or filibustering. It's about safeguards. And I think we are much closer into those safeguards. I think the steps that's being discussed is the right step, looking at healthcare providers to provide testimony. It could be in written, it could be in writing. Okay, I'm not trying to create another 10 ArriveCAN meetings. It could be in writing. We could get guidance from the legal in writing that those are the terms and these are the providers, the healthcare providers that they. And also, I want to understand the implication. I clearly want to understand the implication. And I also want to understand the safeguards that we are going to put in place, because passing a motion saying let's make sure accommodation, great, but also, if we don't go into passing that motion with understanding what those safeguards are and how they're going to be put in place, I think it's a challenge. Okay, so agreed in making sure that we exercise everything, every tool in our toolkit to ensure that these guys arrive and provide the testimony, especially in lieu of the AG. I totally support making sure that we have the safeguards, both for the individual as well as the office of the sergeant at arms. It's important, and I need to understand that. Having a step of pursuing those in those fashion, it is important. And if we have to move a amendment to this motion, we're working on moving that. And as well, and I'll close in the next probably 2 to 3 minutes. I want to go back to the other aspect of what Irek was talking about. So ArriveCAN is labeled as an application that was 80,000 and it mushroomed into 60,000. ArriveCAN initial intent was to be able to enter the individual's name, last name, passport number, and the time of arrival. That application, yes, it's costed $80,000. During the emergency time, the government and the CBSA decided that this is a platform that could be expanded. And you heard from Irek that how it went and the ultimate development cost of an application with 177 enhancement, it came roughly around $8 million. So the notion that this was an $80,000 application and all of a sudden it's false. There were never ArriveCAN as this because the requirement were completely different things. So we were comparing apple to oranges. Okay, so never $80,000 was designed. There was no plan for ArriveCAN with 177 modification that was coming in at the rate of one every other day. that was planned for 80,000 and government said, okay. Now, we hear from across the aisle that across the table, we constantly hear that this is Trudeau ArriveScam application. So first of all, it's not called ArriveScam, it's called ArriveCAN. Second of all, this is not Trudeau's application. This is a Government of Canada and CBSA application that the base for it existed. So if we want to stop, misinforming the public, this is a good time to start. This is not an $80,000 application. This was at best, when you look at the development, and I'll be ready to argue with anyone that how much the cost of this 177 modification would have been. There's no way it will come to what $80,000 is. So the cost is around $8,000 to $9,000 around $8 to $9 million around the development. All the other support stuff, I'm not going to go because Eric went to it. But I want to close with this. And I put that challenge in a very obscure way to the Auditor General, which I didn't get an answer. By the way, on the weekend, I was in a gathering and I was asked point blank that how much this an application would be worth it. And I had someone who also is an expert in e-commerce application. And I put that question to him. I said, if you had an application that had 18 million users, it was downloaded 60 million times, it facilitated over billions of dollars, and it saved lives, and the error of margin was 10,000 among 60 million, and you go figure out what that percentage is, what that application would be if we were going to sell that application in the market. And it was a simple question. Is it worth more than what cost of a development of $5 million? And he said, I would assess that this application would be worth in hundreds of millions of dollars. So let's not confuse the cost of the application with the value of the application. Let's not confuse the fact that CBSA made the decision to develop this internally because they could control. They could make sure that the knowledge transfer stays there. Was it perfect execution? Absolutely not. Is it a good application? Yes. And please, please, please stop saying this is an $80,000 application that's mushroomed to 60 million. Stop calling it a Trudeau ArriveScam app. Stop linking and inefficiencies in department during an emergency into government officials and the fishing expedition that you guys are going. So in summary, we will, once the safeguards is in place, agree into amending this motion to ensure that we can have the two witnesses that we are talking about to come and provide the testimony that we so desperately are looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chouari. Mr. Sousa, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you also to Ms. Vagnola for her work in trying to find a compromise in this nuclear option, setting a precedent that may cause some concern relative to the various matters in regards to those health issues and concerns and the precedent that would set. And I appreciate her, Mrs. Vagnola's attempt to foster a means by which we can respect the concerns of the witnesses. They've advised us. There's been legal counsel, and we've attempted, I presume, twice to invite the witnesses to appear. Another time, and maybe a third would be appropriate, but given the motion before us, the consequences of it that will have in regards to apprehending these witnesses and the implications it would have for us regarding the matters that have been identified by my colleagues and by Mrs. Vagnola herself, who also appreciates these concerns with respect to the integrity and the privacy of the matter that has been addressed to us. I mean, we have been advised by the witnesses and their lawyers to proceed with some caution as a consequence of what has taken place. And the Globe and Mail and other media outlets have already commented on the circumstances by what has occurred, the impact it's had on certain individuals, the conduct by members of this committee who've gone beyond the scope of the committee to address witnesses directly, to circumvent at times the investigation and the investigators, to address matters with independent agencies of government who, by their own accord, do not report directly to a parliamentarian or an elected official, but to the circumstances at hand, including the RCMP. That's their job. They don't take instructions from us, nor should they. And what we're now trying to suggest is we are taking the position, and we have that right, certainly as parliamentarians and as the primacy of Parliament, but to use it in a consequence of this nature, the way it's presented to us today, versus a circumstance that, because it's still ongoing, the investigation is still ongoing, the process by addressing the allegations and the criminality, if that exists, is still underway. And we need to have that process take place. We need the integrity of that process. And I get the frustrations that we're all having in terms of having the witnesses appear before us and affirming the concerns and the actions that they've taken by these particular witnesses, and also by the others that have been discussed and named throughout our deliberations. But there's also a responsibility, I believe, that the consequences of some of the actions that we take, are they going to fulfill and support the investigation? Are they going to enable those responsible to get to the matter at hand? Are they going to be prejudiced by our activities? I don't know the answer, but I do know that the way this motion is put forward, and I really appreciate Mrs. Vignola's attempt to foster something more cooperative, because we're all in agreement to foster a way to enable these witnesses to appear before us. There is that nuclear option. There is a precedent that would occur, and that is ultimately a concern that I think all of us share. And I just, and I go through it, and I appreciate that the front end of this motion has been amended to assess more accurately some of the situations that are before us. In other words, the partisan political stuff that's been removed is helpful, because it's not the way it originally plays. It was as though elected officials and others are complicit with the activities of the activities of CVSA or others. And again, I'm not presupposing it. Like the way we were acting, it assumes that everyone's guilty. We haven't even attempted to determine what actions occurred, and there are other matters that we have privilege to receive that address some of that. And there's also the fact that Christian Firth and others have long been doing business with the government of Canada, years before the development of ArriveCAN. Certainly during the time of the Conservative government, they were quite active in their engagement. We already have a motion that asks to determine and collect those activities, to understand more holistically how these things have taken place. And Christian Firth and others have already appeared before us, and they've already identified some of the processes by which they came to obtain contracts with government throughout the last 20 years. But it's important, given the allegations that are out there, that we want to get to the bottom of what has taken place relative to the application of ArriveCAN, which is a compilation of many IT initiatives. The option then to detain the witnesses, to issue a form of an arrest, to supersede the caution that has been given to us relative to the matters of health, that takes a pause for us. That gives us a reason to be cautious and a reason to offer alternatives, I believe, in the circumstances before us. And we still have more results to come to us. We still have the finalization of the investigation to read and to address. I consider what has been spoken already by some of my colleagues in respect to the establishment of GC strategies in the light of in the recent circumstances when the COVID Alert app came to be, and the suite of tools and the guidance that was developed by government to slow the spread of COVID, to provide opportunities for international trade, to keep businesses going, to enable millions and millions of Canadians to cross the border, and frankly, to be protected from those crossing in. I mean, we had, and if I look at the establishment of the application in the recent period of time that it was required to be made, and the complexity, although some will say it was a very simple thing and it was off-the-shelf application, that's just not true. I mean, the initial proposal, the assessment, you can look at it as building a treehouse in the backyard that costs you $80,000, but this app is like a skyscraper. You have to have contractors and engineers and subcontractors, and the complexity around different departments, and the enablement of assessing millions and millions of transactions, the opportunity to also deal with the privacy issues. There was a lot of complexity, a lot of background in establishing the application and protecting people's privacy. So I am concerned as to the way it reads now, only because of the fact that it may be subject to a precedent that we may have concerns with regards to its finality when we go forward. So I just want us to be sensitive to what that means, and again to thank Mrs. Viola for your amendments. I truly appreciate that. I think our colleagues appreciate that. I think for those watching, please note that all of us on this committee want to see resolution, and we want to ensure that any conduct, if there was any misconduct, that those things are be addressed. We want transparency. We want accountability. We want people to stand forward in terms of what has taken place. And we want to ensure that any application or any processes that did not occur properly are addressed. And much of that is occurring already with the reports from the Auditor General, the Ombudsman, when we heard today from the Officer Information Commissioner. So I just leave this to the committee to appreciate the precedent and the move by which we're trying to put forward at this point, and I will pass it on to the next speaker for their comments.
Mr. Julian, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I would say from the outset that I support the amendment and the motion. I have to say that when you look at it, and I particularly appreciate the fact that Madame Vignola has quoted Bosque and Gagnon. This is our reference, bar none, and it's extremely important. It's also very important to get down to the bottom of the matter, to know what exactly happened. I think that the motion and the amendment is reasonable because it gives you, Chair, the possibility of putting into place any type of accommodation that these individuals would need. You have several weeks to put in place any type of accommodation, and I think that this is something quite reasonable. I also find it important that the committee is getting down to the bottom of the matter. During the Harper years, when the Conservatives were in power, during the 4 years of the majority government, the Conservative majority government, all committees were completely blocked. They could not look thoroughly into matters. As the Phoenix scandal, the ETS scandal, the G8 scandal, none of that could be examined thoroughly precisely because during the Harper regime, with the majority government, we were not provided with the transparency that would allow us to see precisely what was going on. But now we are in a minority government situation, and that makes quite a difference because the committee can make its decision to call its witnesses. And I would think that with reasonable accommodation, we would be able to give that we give to the witnesses. We could ask questions and get answers.
The reason why we're supporting the motion and the amendments is because this has not been a practice of committees. And I'll give you the best example that I can cite, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, and that is Canadian heritage. We had with Meta Corporation, one of the largest corporations in the world, tried to convene Nick Clegg, their president of global affairs, and it was simply refused. There was no interest in Meta, and because Mr. Clegg is not based in Canada, there was no way to do a follow-up to compel him to be a witness. And the reality is, as you know, Mr. Chair, Canadian taxpayers indirectly finance Meta and Google collectively, as the Library of Parliament has indicated to us, over $1 billion a year in taxpayers' money go to an indirect subsidy. We subsidize the advertising on Meta. There are many, many problems with Meta, and yet members of the Heritage Committee, particularly Conservatives, didn't want to press the issue of making sure that Meta was convened and forced to testify. In this case, the amounts involved are smaller, but the reality is we still have that responsibility as a committee to convene and bring witnesses forward and make those accommodations that their medical condition may require. To give a reasonable period of time as well makes sense, and that's what the amendment does. It talks about a 21-day period. It makes sense to do this. I recall the Harper years. I recall how committees were shut down and unable to do their work when Harper Conservatives were in a majority. I certainly believe in a minority parliament we have the ability and we have, I think, the obligation to call witnesses forward, to get to the bottom of what happened with ArriveCAN and why so much money was spent and why the paperwork was not done in a responsible way. I also flag, Mr. Chair, that this dates back as well to the Harper regime and that some of the contracts that were given to the predecessor company for GS Strategies were actually contracts that were provided during the Harper regime. And I think it's important to question the witnesses about those contracts as well that date back to 2012 and 2013. 2013 with the predecessor company. So for all those reasons, I will be supporting the amendment. I will be supporting the motion as amended. I think this is a measured approach. It gets us to the bottom of the information that we need to obtain on behalf of Canadians. It provides for a long enough period, I think, for the witnesses to assure that they are able to come forward. And it provides, Mr. Chair, for you to ensure that the reasonable accommodations provided for any medical conditions that apply. And for those reasons, I support both the amendment and then the motion as amended. Thank you.
That's what's here. It's already here. Thank you very much, Mr. Julian. I have Mrs. Vignola, and then I have Mr. Barrett.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to thank each of my colleagues for having taken the time to thank me. And we can go on and on for a long time so doing. I could speak at length, but that's not my intention. One of my colleagues talked about mitigating factors, measures that were undertaken. We looked at this together. I am open to that, but you don't want to forget that those measures are generally suggested by health practitioners. And we say yes or no to the accommodations that may well be suggested. The people involved have to be directly involved. With respect to the Sergeant-at-Arms references, this isn't recent, but I would like to say that Sir John A. Macdonald was imprisoned. The Prime Minister of Canada was held in custody by the order of the Sergeant-at-Arms. We have here witnesses who have repeatedly refused to testify, to come to the committee. And I would think that they could be handled in the same way as our former prime ministers. I'm not joking here. It's in the books. It's in the register. And also, the ability of a sergeant-at-arms to arrest goes back to 1542 when the House of Commons in London ordered their sergeant-at-arms to free a member of Parliament who had been imprisoned by the City of London. And that was the first instance of the use of a custody warrant used by a sergeant-at-arms. There were also precedents that go far back, well before Canada, and that can be found in the procedural book if you choose to refer to that book. To conclude, I would like to thank you for having shared your points of view concerning the amendment, concerning ArriveCAN. It's certain, despite the fact that it wasn't really an in-house application that was developed because there were so many contractors that were involved in it, so much contracting out. But yes, it was developed. Yes, it allowed Canada to trade with the United States. But it would have been even better if it had cost $1 or $2 or less, maybe 15 or 20 cents per Canadian taxpayer. We still don't know what the final cost is per taxpayer. And that is not the case. 177 changes, amendments, yes, but we were not looking at all of them, but at the 25 most important. Were they justified? How were they done? What time was spent on making those changes? we don't know whether or not they were carried out in terms of the Auditor General's audit. She spoke to that. It's not Julie Vignola who is speaking to that. So, with respect to my sub-amendment, I understand that it is important not to create precedents, but we submit what we have and support it.
No, I have you, Mr. Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I think, like everyone here, we're trying to get to the bottom of this, and I don't want to prolong the discussion too much more. I believe a lot has been said. I do want to recognize that, you know, GC strategies in particular, and the two people in question, you know, on one hand, we try to keep things confidential when it comes to people's health, and I think, Mr. Chair, you also indicated that, you know, you intervened and said that just to make sure that we're not using certain terms, but I mean, it's already out there, and it has been reported, and it's something that I think that was a large portion of the many of the members here's discussion on what we need to protect, and we need to ensure that those matters of privacy are protected. We intend on voting yes to this, Madam Vignola's sub-amendment, but just a friendly change if we could make, which would be that such accessibility accommodations the witnesses may request be agreed by the subcommittee and arranged by the chair. So if we could please include just a friendly inclusion of this into that, if all members agree, I'd like to put that forward.
Well, thanks. If we can get Mr. Souza, are you wishing to speak to this sub-amendment as well from Mrs. Souza,
No.
or are we done with Mr. Baines?
I think Mr. Baines has expressed our friendly amendment.
Thanks. What I'll do, colleagues, rather than, because we can't sub-amend and sub-amendment, I will put through perhaps seek UC to adopt that under the paragraph with the first step, but within 21 days. Sorry, Mr. Barrett?
Point of order.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're not going to go ahead. Hold on. We have, okay, I have a point of order from Mr. Julian, then we have a question from Mr. Barrett. Go ahead, is it Mr. Julian? Sorry, I didn't see you. Who it was?
Yes,
sorry, go ahead.
was. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to pass the baton to our very dedicated member of Parliament for Skeena-Bulkley Valley, Mr. Backrack, who is now attending. Thanks for all of your courtesy. I've enjoyed being with the committee today.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Julian. I don't think we've seen you here in the 8 years I've been, or 107 years, as Mr. Kusmarchuk has stated, that I've been on OGGO. But Mr. Backrack, the member from New Westminster, has been bad-mouthing you and your writing the whole time. So I'm glad to have you back so you can set the record straight. Bye, Mr. Julian.
It's good to be back. Thank you,
Mr.
Peter.
Julian, Mr. Backrack, when did you come in on this? Because we're ready.
I've just come in a moment ago, but I'm ready to vote if you're approaching the vote.
Right. We're hoping to have a quick UC to adopt that within 21 days of the adoption of this order, and with such accessibility accommodations, the which witnesses may request, agreed to by the subcommittee, and the chair agreed to arrange. So that is, if we have, yes, Mr. Barrett.
Yeah, Chair, so we've just withstood a filibuster of several hours on this by the Liberals, and I have to say that after good faith was extended by the Bloc in negotiating an amended version of the motion, and then Ms. Vignola was thanked 37 times by each of the members for collaborating with them. they still talked for 2 days on the motion. So I don't sense good faith in dealing with this. And my fear is in taking this into a subcommittee, am I correct that a subcommittee is in camera?
Generally, we do meet in camera.
So my concern is that this goes somewhere quiet behind closed doors to die. And the subcommittee generally acts on consensus, and I feel like this is an opportunity for them to kill it behind closed doors. We just had Mr. Julian, who says he's in favor, but spent his time, talking about times long before many of us were elected, and probably before the last time that these powers were used by the House of Commons. So I'm a little nervous about that, but I'm quite sure that that we don't have good faith in dealing with Liberal members on taking this behind closed doors. This is a mechanism of accountability for two individuals who have refused to present when summoned by a parliamentary committee twice. Twice they've been instructed to appear after having been invited, and then twice they refused a legal summons to appear. The proposal by Ms. Vignola was very generous. She consulted with all parties, and all parties...
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. I think my colleague is confused here. Yeah. And the reason I say that is the subcommittee would gather, as this UC puts forward, to gather to talk about accommodations, to agree upon accommodations for the witnesses. That is all. The meeting would still take place in public. And so I think my honorable colleague here is confusing the two issues. Okay. The subcommittee meeting would simply be to discuss the accommodations for the witnesses regarding to their health issues.
What happens if there's...
We're getting off track here.
We're on track, Chair.
No, let me finish. I suggested to UC we do not have that, so I suggest that we move. We were at a point of, I think Mr. Baines was the last speaker, right? Right. So we were going to go to a vote on the original motion.
Okay.
Can we do that, colleagues?
I still have the floor.
Sorry, the original sub-motion. And I have Ms. Adams. Go ahead then, Mr. Barrett. Yeah. We won't get to a vote.
Sure. So I don't need any clarification from Mr. Kaczmarczyk. It's quite clear that if there is not agreement in the subcommittee to the accommodation, then the meeting doesn't happen. Yep. And so having the meeting behind closed doors is the opportunity for the Liberals to kill it, just like they were trying to do with their filibuster. And so I don't have confidence in them. And so I would be unable to support an element of this motion that removes the transparent nature of public debate and discussion on this, because good faith hasn't been shown to this point. And so that's not a courtesy that we can support. If there are discussions to have, the discussions should happen in public. If the commitment is that the committee will discuss accommodations in public, well, then there's transparency. That's something that is a different conversation to have. But as for closed door, cameras off, backroom deals where there's an opportunity for the cover-up coalition to engage, I can't abide.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. That is absolutely uncalled for. That snide comment at the end.
We'll get you some Kleenex, Eric.
Gentlemen, please.
Yeah, we've shown nothing but collaboration.
We're going to start to insult.
You've shown contempt for Canadians.
Mr. Barrett, please.
It is unfortunate.
I understand, Mr. Kaczmarczyk. We're going to move on. I think Mrs. Vignola had her hand up. No, she's fine. I had Miss Atwin had her hand up. Are you speaking, or did you take your hand down?
I was going to cede my time, Mr. Chair.
Okay,
but I just wanted to mention again that to suggest the subcommittee is somehow nefarious in its responsibilities to this committee is just, it's unbelievable, but it fits with kind of the rest of the discussions that we've been having. So just, I wish Mr. Barrett would retract that statement.
Okay, Mr. Barrett, please. Mr. Jouari.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in that subcommittee, what we will be discussing is, in a very open way, the health situation, which we are not allowed to discuss the implication of those health situation, the testimony that we want to hear from the healthcare, the implication and the safeguards and the potential threat to safety and security of involved. Those are not, we are not allowed to talk about it publicly. For us to come back and make the accommodation, we need to talk about those. We cannot talk about those in public. So there is no conspiracy theory. There is nothing we are trying to hide. I gladly give my spot to anybody who wants to be part of the subcommittee, so long as we are talking about the safeguards. Or the chair can come back and rule that, yes, there is no issue now. We can talk about these things publicly, and it's not going to impact the integrity, and it's not going to be, I'll be the first one who vote for going into public and talking about it, because we're dying to go to public and talk about these things. So the reason we are saying subcommittee in camera is because we will be talking about the safeguards and the implication and health-related material that we are not allowed to with respect to ensuring that we have the integrity of our investigation and also the safety. Thank you.
Mr. Bachrach?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. It seems like one option might be to engage in the subcommittee in good faith. And if things do go sideways, and if there are parties or members at that subcommittee meeting that aren't engaging in good faith in this discussion of accommodations, that the subcommittee can go into a public meeting and have the remainder of the conversation in public. We do have that option at any time, to my understanding. It's not a debatable motion and is in order at any time. So perhaps that would strike a balance. It seems like there's a lack of trust, and I think some of that is probably warranted given some of the games that we've seen played by different sides of the table. Certainly our intention is to get through this and to have the witnesses testify and to get answers for Canadians. And if this conversation about accommodations, I do think it has merit as an in-camera conversation given the sensitivity of the personal situation. But if people show up and play politics, a motion to go in public is always in order, and I would be happy to make that motion. That's all.
Okay. Well, we're still debating Ms. Vignola's sub-amendment. I see. Oh, Mr. Kuzmierczak?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say that for those that are watching sort of at home, what oftentimes happens in committees is while discussions are taking place, while an MP has the floor and is speaking and opining and on various issues, there are discussions that take place between staff members of the various parties and negotiating and discussing what could be a path forward, especially if there appears to be a Gordian knot that we're trying to undo. And for those watching, there was discussion that was taking place over the last couple hours that we were here in discussion, and we seem to have found a path forward. I mean, this was something that was suggested by my colleagues, this path forward and this small change that we're requesting was suggested by the opposition members themselves. And we seem to have found a path forward that we agreed to. We want to see, the ultimate goal here is to see the witnesses. We've all said this. We're united in wanting to see the witnesses here before committee and speaking. The only thing that we're asking is that when we're having discussions about what accommodations to bring forward in order to address the serious health concerns, that we do so as a subcommittee. This is normal practice. How many times have we had issues where rather than discuss something, especially if there might be sensitive information at play, we ask the subcommittee to step forward and make a decision amongst themselves. I believe in our ability to do that, despite how cantankerous and rancorous the debates may be, and when the cameras are going. When the cameras are off, you see tremendous collaboration and partnership. And again, this isn't something that's egregious. We're simply saying, if we're going to talk about health accommodations, and we're going to talk about health information, and we're going to talk about sensitive issues when it comes to somebody's health, let's do that at a subcommittee where we can have an open discussion and a debate. And as my colleague again, MP Backrack, who has joined us fairly recently, has always stepped forward with what are responsible, measured, thoughtful solutions and path forward. This is what we have here. Again, let's discuss those issues. And if there's some kind of an impasse at subcommittee, my goodness, bring it forward and into the light. I can tell you from our end, from our position, we want to do everything we possibly can to come into agreement, get the accommodations agreed to, have the witnesses come and testify. So again, I don't understand the spirit that Mr. Barrett is trying to interject here into these discussions when again we seem to be approaching consensus and collaboration and an opportunity to move this forward and get the witnesses here before the committee, which is our ultimate goal. So I don't understand the motivations of my colleague here. I really, truly don't. OGGO, I've been on this committee now for over 4 years. It has worked in a spirit of collaboration. It has done the people's business. And I don't understand again, the spirit here that my colleague is trying to interject into what is traditionally a collaborative committee that works hard and gets work done. So again, there are no games on our side. Let's talk about accommodation and let's do what we can to get the witnesses to testify at this committee, which is we all want to do. So I just wanted to clarify that again. I wanted to thank yet again, I think it bears repeating, I want to thank Madame Vigneault for setting the table for this, for doing the hard work the last couple of days to bring this forward. It is a sensible sub-amendment. And at the same time, we're trying to introduce a sensible UC motion that simply allows us to talk about accommodations and health in the proper forum and to move forward on this. So that's it from my end, and I'm going to turn things over now to my colleague. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. I see Ms. Atwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in the interest of time and maybe coming to a final negotiation here, if we don't send it to the subcommittee, that it's the committee can decide, and then implementation would fall to you, Mr. Chair. Would that be more agreeable to my colleague, Mr. Barrett?
Indeed, it would.
Great.
That one, we should have had you
Sorry,
speak
that's
like 3
just in
hours
camera,
ago.
correct? Sorry, that point of order, whether it's in subcommittee or whether it's in committee as a whole, this will be in camera, so we can talk about all of those things freely, correct?
I'm not, Ms. Atwin, what were you suggesting? Could you confirm that to Mr. Jory, what you were suggesting?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it's because it's the accommodations for sensitive health concerns. So I guess I made the assumption it would be in camera. Hopefully that's still agreeable for my colleague.
Mr. Barrett?
The difference, of course, is that the full committee has the ability to move in and out of in-camera proceedings as necessary. And so if there's information that can only be dealt with in camera, then it ought to be dealt with there. But if there's information that are just logistical in nature, then if there's consensus that would only be dealt with in public, and that we agree that the chair will report out of any in camera we have, then it's absolutely then that satisfies the transparency and the protection of any personal information.
Perfect. With the assumption that the actual meeting with GC is in public, as I think Mr. Kuzmierczak stated, I think. Mr. Souza, you have your hand up, sir? Oh, okay. Can we just suspend for a couple of minutes? I'll just make sure that the clerk has what properly documented what we seem to have agreed to. Just suspend for a couple seconds.
Wow. What a pile of BS this has turned out to be. As the Liberals stonewall this committee, they're trying to find a way to change the direction of the committee so that the committee starts focusing on other issues like the health information that the ArriveCAN app has gathered and such, rather than what they should. For those of you that are new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Share the content with your friends on Facebook, any other social media. Let's help get this out there so people can see exactly what the Liberals do. Like, let your Liberal friends know. Like, this is what these guys do. They're wasting millions of dollars of taxpayers' money in these meetings, not doing anything they should be for Canadians. It's appalling. It's funny. Obviously, these Liberals have a lot to hide when they're going to spend this much time trying to stop this committee from being able to move forward. Why else would they do that unless they had something to hide? I'm tired of these Liberals, man. Brutal. Yeah, there's already a committee dealing with health. Actually, there's a couple committees and dealing with health. I don't know why they're trying to bring that into a subcommittee. The only thing I could see them trying to do is to change the direction of this investigation so that it's no longer an investigation about GC strategies, but it's an investigation about the information gathered by the ArriveCAN app. That's the only thing that I could see. I don't know. Unless somebody else can figure something out. But that they're trying to kibosh it. They just spent over an hour rambling in circles. Like, they talked about nothing. They repeated the same thing over and over again. They just said it a different way. Yeah, and they got to realize that Canadians are watching them filibuster a committee, which makes this committee not move forward. So then we need more meetings, which cost taxpayers even more money. Like, these Liberals are so out of touch, man. I cannot wait until Conservatives take over. I hope they stomp them right into the ground. Anyone that would like to can help support the channel by purchasing a super chat or a sticker. And for those of you that can't, subscribe and hit the like button. That also helps the channel. Yeah, they don't care if Canadians want answers. All they care about is hiding their shady dealings. That's all they care about. I'm tired of liberal insiders getting filthy rich on the back of Canadians. Like, people are out there suffering every day. The tent encampments just keep getting bigger. And this government, I don't even know, words cannot describe how idiotic this government is. And that's saying it lightly. It's only because I don't want to get in trouble for cursing. Otherwise, I'd lose my mind right now. Yeah, there's something needs to be done. It's not even a proper government. It's a totalitarian regime. Ridiculous. They basically accomplished nothing in this meeting. Liberals made sure that, and then the NDP just follows along. You know that even after the supply agreement ends with Jagmeet Singh and Trudeau, they're going to continue to prop up Trudeau. They have to. If they don't, then everything they fought for while they were in will get taken away by conservatives. And I hope to God it gets all taken away. It's a joke.
I really appreciate everyone working together for this. I think we have a solution, and I will read it, and this will be on Ms. Vignola's sub-amendment. We'll just need UC to accept these changes. Under the paragraph that starts with first step, we'll say, but within 21 days of the adoption of this order, and with such accessibility accommodations, the witnesses may request to be agreed upon by the committee and the chair agreed to arrange. Understanding, of course, that the committee can move in and out of camera anytime they want. Under Section A, where it starts, under second step, Section A, where it says the Sergeant at Arms shall take, et cetera, for the purposes, second line, for the purposes of enforcing their attendance before the committee in public at dates and times determined by the chair of the committee. So we're fine with that? Yep. Great. So if I have UC on that, perfect. So that we now have to vote on this sub-amendment, Ms. Vignola's sub-amendment, as we just discussed. Do we need a vote, or are we fine adopting Ms. IC agreement to adopt? Yep. So that's done. We are now into discussing Mr. Garnett's original amendment, which I understand he will withdraw. If we can have UC, if Mr. Generous agrees. He agrees. If we can have UC to withdraw Mr. Genes's original amendment. Perfect. We will now vote on the motion as amended. Can we just agree, or I see thumbs up all around? So adopted. Colleagues, thank you very much. A lot of very good points brought up by all sides, I will state, so I sincerely appreciate it. I appreciate the work of our clerk, who is with us for a couple more days, dealing with us. Unless there's something else, we will be adjourned.
Thank you, Julie. Just a point of order, Chair. Sometimes there are delays in getting the minutes of the committee up. Could you ask the clerk to distribute the correct form of the motion that was adopted by email to members, just so we can have it and know have the exact text in front of us right away before the minutes are published?
Yeah, you'll have it out today in both official languages. Sometime today, before end of business day, probably. Satisfactory? Wonderful. Colleagues, thank you again, sincerely. Again, a lot of good points all around by everyone. We are adjourned.
All right, guys, that's it. Again, like and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with another ArriveCAN meeting. Hopefully, it doesn't get kiboshed, or they vote to change or amend something that so we can't see it. So stay tuned tomorrow, and I will air another ArriveCAN meeting. Have a good night, everyone.